There's a very specific kind of silence that happens during an exam. You probably know it. Papers rustling, chairs shifting, someone coughing in the back of the room, and inside your own head, nothing. Just a strange, hollow quiet where answers were supposed to be. What makes it worse is that you did study. You remember the night clearly, the desk lamp still on at 2 a.m., the cold coffee you kept reheating, the pages you kept rereading even when the sentences started blurring together. You told yourself, just one more chapter, the same way people say, just one more episode, except yours didn't come with background music or a happy ending. And yet, the next day, when it mattered, everything felt out of reach. Like trying to recall a dream that dissolves the moment you open your eyes. For a long time, I thought that feeling meant something was wrong with me. Maybe I just wasn't disciplined enough. Maybe other people were naturally better at remembering things. That's what it looked like, at least. Some students seemed to sit down, glance at the exam, and start writing immediately, like their brains had been quietly organizing information overnight while the rest of us were still searching for where we put it. It turns out the difference often isn't intelligence, it's method. And the frustrating part is that nobody really explains this early on. We're handed textbooks, notebooks, highlighters, maybe a stack of lecture slides, and somehow we're expected to figure out the rest by trial and error. Most of us copy what we see others doing, highlighting lines, rereading notes, staring at the same page until familiarity begins to feel like mastery. It feels productive. That's the trap. Familiarity is comforting. Real learning, on the other hand, is slightly uncomfortable. Sometimes very uncomfortable. It involves moments where you realize, wait, I don't actually understand this. And that realization can sting a little. So we avoid it without noticing. We stay in the safer zone, reading, underlining, watching explanations. Activities that create the illusion of progress because they're smooth and effortless. The brain likes smooth. It mistakes it for competence. I remember one semester in particular when I spent hours every evening rewriting my notes neatly, convinced that cleaner handwriting somehow meant clearer understanding. The notebooks looked impressive. Color-coded headings, tidy margins, diagrams drawn with suspicious precision. If neatness were graded, I would have topped the class. The exam results, however, had other opinions. That was the first time I began to suspect that maybe effort alone wasn't the issue. Maybe the type of effort mattered more. There's something odd about memory. It doesn't strengthen when information simply enters your mind. It strengthens when information is pulled back out. Think of it like walking through a path in tall grass. The first time you pass through, the grass closes behind you almost immediately. But if you keep walking the same route again and again, eventually a trail appears. Retrieval, trying to recall something without looking, is what presses the grass down. Reading alone is just standing at the edge, admiring the field. Of course, trying to recall things from memory can feel slow and awkward at first. You sit there staring at a blank page, waiting for an answer that doesn't immediately arrive, and it's tempting to flip the book open just to check. I still catch myself doing that sometimes. There's a tiny impatience inside us that hates the pause, hates the uncertainty. But strangely enough, that pause is where the learning happens. The slight struggle signals to the brain that this information isn't disposable, it's worth holding on to. Another thing no one really warns you about is how unreliable marathon study sessions are. They feel heroic hours of continuous work, the sense that you're sacrificing comfort for future success. But memory doesn't always reward heroics. It rewards repetition spaced over time, small revisits that whisper, still important, instead of one dramatic night that screams, urgent, and then disappears. The brain seems to trust what shows up consistently more than what arrives in a rush. I once experimented, mostly out of desperation, with studying less per day but returning to the same material every few days. It felt almost suspiciously easy, like I was getting away with something. 10 minutes here, 15 there, nothing cinematic about it. Yet when the next test came around, something surprising happened. Instead of forcing answers out, they surfaced on their own, as if they'd been quietly waiting. That was the first time studying felt less like cramming things in, and more like gently reinforcing what was already there. There's also the strange power of explaining things aloud. Not performing a polished lecture, just talking through an idea, even if you stumble over the wording. When you try to put a concept into simple language, you immediately discover the parts you don't fully understand. It's humbling. Sometimes, you start a sentence confidently and then slow down halfway through, realizing you've reached the edge of your clarity. That moment used to annoy me. Now I treat it like a small arrow pointing exactly where I need to look next. And honestly, studying becomes a little less lonely when you do that. Even if no one else is around, speaking an idea out loud turns it into a conversation of sorts. I've explained topics to empty rooms, to imaginary students, once even to a slightly confused-looking houseplant. It sounds ridiculous, but the act of teaching, even pretend teaching, forces your thoughts into structure. You can't hide behind vague understanding when you're trying to make something clear. Consistency, though, that's the quiet backbone of everything. Not the dramatic, I changed my life overnight kind of consistency, but the smaller version. Sitting down for a short review, even when you don't feel particularly motivated. Starting with something tiny, one practice problem, one flashcard, one paragraph, explained in your own words, and letting momentum build from there. Motivation often shows up after you begin, not before. That took me longer than I'd like to admit to learn. There's a comforting myth that top students are always intensely focused, always energized, always ahead. In reality, many of them just show up more regularly. They forget things too. They get distracted too. The difference is that they return again and again, nudging the same pieces of information back into place until the knowledge settles more firmly than it ever could during a single late-night sprint. And yes, sleep matters more than we pretend. It feels counterproductive to close the books earlier when there's still material left to review, but the brain does a surprising amount of sorting and filing while you're asleep. Skipping that step is a bit like saving dozens of files on your computer and then refusing to let the system organize them. Everything technically exists, but good luck finding it quickly when you need it. If all this sounds less dramatic than the traditional study harder advice, that's because it is. Learning, when it works well, doesn't always look intense from the outside. It looks repetitive, quiet, occasionally even a little boring. Yet that quiet repetition is what slowly seals the leaks in the bucket. Information stops slipping away so easily. Connections start forming where none existed before. And one day, almost without noticing when it happened, you realize that topics that once felt intimidating now feel familiar in a deeper way. Not because you've seen them many times, but because you can use them. I still have moments during exams where my mind hesitates. That never fully disappears. But the blank, panicked emptiness I used to feel is rare now. More often, there's a brief pause, like a search engine loading, and then the answer begins to assemble itself piece by piece. Not perfectly, not instantly, but reliably enough that I trust it will come. If you've been studying for hours and still feel like nothing is sticking, it might not mean you're failing. It might just mean you've been pouring water into a bucket that hasn't been patched yet. A few small adjustments, testing yourself instead of rereading, revisiting material across days instead of one long night, explaining ideas in your own messy words, can quietly change how that bucket works. Not overnight, rarely overnight, but steadily, almost invisibly, until the effort you put in finally stays where you put it. And when that happens, something shifts. Studying stops feeling like an endless cycle of forgetting and relearning. It starts feeling, slowly but unmistakably, like building something that lasts.